Now, the second Russia-Africa summit in St Petersburg was predictably overshadowed by the war in Ukraine. Russia's refusal to agree to an extension of the Black Sea grain deal, which expired earlier in the month, also came into the spotlight. To discuss this further, I am joined by the international relations expert, Brooks Spector. Thank you very much, Mr. Spector, for your time here on eNCA. Before I get to the grain deal that they, basically just snubbed on, I just want to ask you about the fact that, the first summit, the first Russia-Africa summit, 43 African nations attended. This time, only 17. Is that anything telling?
Well, I think well, good morning and good to be with you. I think it is. I mean, you know the expression to vote with your feet, that is to move away from a conflict or an issue or a problem or an unpalatable circumstance. And in this case, a fair number of African nations, as you correctly note, decided not to appear. They didn't overtly criticize the event, but they simply didn't show up. They didn't bother to attend. And this obviously included nations that have voted against Russia in the various UN votes, but it included others as well. And in part, I think it was a function of the fact that the previous summit 3 years ago or thereabouts clearly overpromised what Russia might do for Africa. At the time, you might remember Vladimir Putin said they're going to increase trade, Russia-Africa trade, by 4 times. And of course, that hasn't happened. And if my numbers are accurate, effectively, the total trade has actually dropped over what it was. And in any case, Russia-Africa trade is very small in the first place. For this country, Russia-South Africa trade is almost a rounding error within the overall statistics of South African trade numbers. And the second half of it, of course, was, besides the overpromising, was a degree of dissatisfaction specifically with the Russian cancellation of the Black Sea grain initiative, but the larger course of the war itself. And I think if I were a Russian analyst, I might be very distressed to see what has happened.
And Mr. Spector, let's talk about the countries that actually decided not to attend this time. I think these are very strategic countries in the African context. Nigeria, for instance, is one of, the countries that is, sometimes interchanges with South Africa when it comes to the economy of Africa. There was also Kenya, a fast-growing economy, and there was also Rwanda, another fast-growing economy in the African context that didn't attend. So that's also something big in terms of them rejecting Putin.
No, it's quite clear. Countries like Nigeria and Kenya, and a little bit less so, obviously, Rwanda because of its overall size, those are big players in Africa, and increasingly, in the case of Kenya, a growing international player as a whole. And for them not to attend, for them not to participate, sends a message to the Russians that this is not exactly how this should be played. One has to wonder whether or not big summits like this, multiple numbers of countries going somewhere to attend an event where there are lots of speeches and people promise things and then the things don't happen, you have to wonder whether or not such kinds of events have sort of gone beyond their utility other than as propaganda vehicles.
And, looking at the Black Sea grain initiative and pulling out of that, maybe some African countries felt as though that was a stab in the back by the Russian president, especially looking at the fact that already our food prices are soaring. So that's probably going to add to Africa's woes.
Well, you have to remember that the grain market globally is not a country-to-country market. It's a global market, and so anytime the supply of the commodity decreases because of one thing or another, and in this case because of the inability of the Ukrainians to export their grain, it affects the prices universally because There's a limited amount. There are all the people, all the countries, all the businesses, all the traders who wish to buy it. And if there's not enough, the price will go up. But there's another player in that doesn't get as mentioned as often, but is at least as important in the demand side of things, and that's the World Food Program, a UN specialized agency that has consistently been a major purchaser of grain shipped out of Ukraine, and which is used very significantly for countries in great need, either for civil war or climatic reasons or drought, or failed harvests, or variety of things. And the World Food Program largely takes care of circumstances that are already in crisis, and so any constriction on the supply side of the grain affects the World Food Program rather dramatically. And that's above and beyond the normal regimen of trading and consuming and supply.
Just lastly, Mr. Spector, does the fact that there were so many countries, I mean, from 43 down to 17 during the first summit and this year's summit is quite a huge drop. Does that also have anything to do, obviously, with geopolitics and the Western world, as one of Africa's largest traders trying to, or rather having a hand in the African countries not going there because that's our largest, trade partner in terms of Russia trying to grow its partnership to Africa and the de-dollarization?
Well, I mean, the Russians have made a statement or two saying it was all the fault of the West for telling the Africans not to show up. But, I mean, in a sense, that's silly. I mean, individual countries made their choices, or their leaders did, and they made them on the basis of self-interest. If a place like Kenya chose not to attend, it's because it saw its future increasingly tied to the West rather than in a kind of fake solidarity with the South.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, international relations expert Brooks Spector.